nobody says that a democracy will last forever. Britain was one of the first parliamentary democracies. It gave its system of the Prime Minister and Parliament to much of the world. But that doesn't mean it's going to carry on.
So the hours are ticking down to another historic day in British politics. Sir Keir Starmer will head to Buckingham Palace tomorrow morning to hand the King his resignation. Soon afterwards, King Charles will receive Andy Burnham and will ask him to form a new government. After which, Burnham will then drive back to Downing Street to address the nation from outside Number 10. It's become a scene we're all pretty familiar with.
Fulfil the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st. No ifs or buts.
As Prime Minister, I will pursue 3 early priorities. Firstly, I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim, and I admired her restlessness to create change, but some mistakes were made.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation.
Gosh, when you hear all of those speeches back, it used to be that it was such a big deal to get a new Prime Minister, but here we are. Well, look, let's get some historical perspective. We're bringing you everything sort of in real time and all the sort of gossip and speculation. But let's take a step back with somebody we always enjoy speaking with, Sir Anthony Seldon, eminent political historian and the author of many a book, including Impossible Office, the history of the British Prime Minister. Sir Anthony, welcome to the show.
Well, nice to be on.
How are you feeling on the eve of our 7th Prime Minister in 10 years?
Well, who would not want listening for the Andy Burnham government to be a success after unprecedented churn in modern times, to have yet another premiership that bites the dust early, goes down in flames, and creates yet more uncertainty. I mean, this is not good for anybody. And so to have a Prime Minister who can command the agenda, and Prime Ministers are either in command or they're not. And Keir Starmer was never in command. He never understood the need to provide a real conviction and credibility and confidence and command about where he was taking the country. So, I think it's exciting. Ayesha, I think he's got a lot going for him, and there's a real chance for a new start for Britain. On the other hand, one has to be realistic too. And he's taking over a company, if Britain is a company that is very heavily in debt, and the outgoings exceed the incomings in terms of revenue. So he's got real issues on finance, on foreign policy, as we were hearing Josh Glancy talk about, on holding the Labour Party together, and much more. So, interesting times. And I think just to mention that the best prime ministers have had long periods in office to prepare. Margaret Thatcher, one of the iconic prime ministers, love her or hate her, she was absolutely iconic, and changed Britain, had 4 years. Tony Blair had 3 years. Andy Burnham's had preciously little time to get ready. And I think that is going to be a very significant marker that we'll be talking more about in the months to come. Doesn't mean he can't do it. It means it's more difficult.
I suppose his allies would say, look, he was elected 25 years ago and he's also been thinking deeply about what he wants to do. But you're right. And look, Sir Anthony, do you think he would be wise when he makes his speech to the country tomorrow. I mean, it felt like the speech on Friday was very much to the brethren of the Labour Party and the people in that room. To me, it felt like quite a party speech. This will have to be a speech to the public, to the citizens of this country. And the mood in the country is very different to the mood at the TUC conference hall on Friday, which was very happy and very emotional and very nostalgic. The country is pretty fed up with politics. The country is rightly pretty cynical about these new starts. Do you think he would be wise to sort of dial down the soaring rhetoric and kind of acknowledge how a lot of the public must be feeling at the moment?
Well, the Prime Minister is both head of their party, and if they don't do that well, whether Labour or Tory, then they don't last in power, but they're also head of the nation. There's a mystical transition that comes over them on that journey back from Buckingham Palace tomorrow into Downing Street, where they recognise that they are the head of government for every single person living in Britain. And you have to be able to convince both your own party and the nation. And we hear so many words from those incoming prime ministers about how they're going to transform the country. And, it hasn't happened. Prime Minister after Prime Minister has made all kinds of promises.
Yeah.
And this is feeding to the growing mistrust of countries. So I think he will need to be very clear that it's going to be a daunting problem and that it's going to be tough for everybody to get this country sorted out, and not helped by 2 years of Keir Starmer, when more could and should have been done, not the least on economic policy, to get the country into a stronger position. So, it's going to be tough for him. But here's another thing. Ayesha, we talked about this before. Britain's best prime ministers have always come into daunting challenges. They have come in and they prevailed against huge difficulty. Taking Labour most famously, it would be obviously Clement Attlee in 1945 at the end of the Second World War, where the country broke and with the need to rebuild the country economically and socially, or Harold Wilson coming into power, the Labour leader, in 1964, at a time that the country was in bad need to develop scientifically and technologically. So the strong prime ministers have great adversity, and they're not full of pessimism like Keir Starmer, I'm afraid, too often was. They have a very clear plan that he didn't have, and they tell people it's going to be tough, but we're going to get there. He can do some of that. He'll take both the country with him because they'll recognise the realism in that, and he'll take the party with him with luck. Yeah.
I mean, it is important to note that all new prime ministers start with, good intentions and the soaring rhetoric. I was listening back to, Keir Starmer when he first became prime minister. He talked about a mission-led government. He talked about wanting to bear down on the cost of living. He talked about returning government and politics to the service of working people. I mean, we do hear that kind of promise. All new prime ministers start with very, very big aspirations. I suppose what's hard for the public is, this is the 7th time we're going to hear this fresh start speech in 10 years. And you've got to, as you say, give people hope and give people the inspiration. But people are also quite burnt out by the churn. I mean, people are quite bewildered by the churn at the top of British politics, Anthony.
They are bewildered. They're absolutely bewildered. And this is not good. I mean, nobody says that a democracy will last forever. Britain was one of the first parliamentary democracies. It gave its system of the Prime Minister and Parliament to much of the world. But that doesn't mean it's going to carry on. We have to ensure that Prime Ministers are both good at their job and good human beings. And you need to be both to be a successful prime minister. And Andy Burnham's going to need to be very straight, very clear. And it just slightly worries me. This doesn't mean he's not going to do it, but being prime minister is a giant leap. And Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney and Rachel Reeves never showed that they really understood what a giant leap that it was and how very serious. They didn't prepare. If you don't prepare for anything in life, it will not happen. So he's going to have to be realistic, very strong, very much in command, and also underneath the water, his duck feet are going to have to, whatever ducks have, are going to have to be paddling frantically while he's also thinking about the short, the medium, and the long term. Also, because he has not. I mean, as you say, he's been around in politics at the top a long time, but he's never been preparing systematically for every single department of state, and including AI, and including the aging population, and the cost of living, and the expensive energy, and the geopolitical crisis, all these things. It's a very big deal, and he has to show that he is up for that, and that he has the gravitas to take this country through.
Well, it is going to be fascinating to see, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he wants to pitch that incredibly important speech. And as you say, and I think, of course, he will have been thinking deeply about all of these things, but I think probably the thing that exemplifies just what a difference in terms of gear change is that, of course, when he gets into Downing Street, one of his first jobs will be getting a briefing from the top military men about the nuclear situation. He will have to write a letter about what would happen in the event of a nuclear strike, and nothing nothing symbolises that contrast in terms of.
You were there with Gordon Brown. I mean, it is intensely, on one level, frightening and sobering when you realise what a very, very big job being Prime Minister is, and it requires one to be the very opposite of frivolous, which was Boris Johnson's downfall. He really couldn't be serious enough about it. You need to be deadly serious, but also optimistic. And you also need to have that planning. And as you saw with Gordon Brown, he had 10 years at the Treasury and as Chancellor, right at the heart of government, but he didn't really have enough of an idea about what he was going to do, what his plan for power was, until the global financial crisis came in after his first 2 months, and that then gave him his script, and getting Britain through that and out on top became the governing mantra and theme of his premiership. It's tough if you don't have that time to really work it through, and it doesn't mean he's not going to do well. It's just saying, wow, this is a very difficult, very big ask.
It's a lot. Well, look, Sir Anthony, as always, a great pleasure to speak with you. Thanks so much for your time. That's Sir Anthony Seldon there. Well, let's have a look at what voters think about Andy Burnham. Let's now speak with Claire Ainsley, who is the director of the Progressive Policy Institute and was a former director of policy to Keir Starmer. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. So
you've done some polling. Tell us what you've found.
So together with Deborah Mattinson, who also worked for Keir Starmer as Director of Strategy, we've done a poll of working class voters over last weekend and some focus groups this week. And what we wanted to understand was, why did voters who voted Labour in July 2024, if they're pulling away from Labour, why, and what is it that this new Prime Minister needs to do to win them back? And we just found they felt very let down. They felt really despondent about politics in general. They are listening to what this new Prime Minister has to say, but he's probably not got very long before they may switch off again. So he really needs to make those first impressions count.
And what are they concerned about? What are the issues that they really care about, and how do they view him?
So at the moment, the things that they care about are the same sort of things that they've been caring about for some time. So cost of living obviously was on people's minds. I think we really noticed how much people felt that their local areas really mattered to how they seemed. So they didn't really relate necessarily to this north-south divide. We did some in Kent and we did some up in the northeast, but they all felt that like their local areas felt really neglected. So I think that's going to be a priority. And of course, immigration continued to come up as an issue that they wanted to see action on. In terms of what they thought about Andy Burnham, funny enough, they didn't really know him very well. So outside of the northwest, he wasn't well known, but that's both obviously an opportunity and a bit of a challenge. So an opportunity for his team really to introduce Andy to the country as someone who's going to govern for all places, but also to be much more connected to the public than obviously Keir was able to be.
And in terms of that connection and the point you make about the local, which I think is so important. I mean, I know, we're talking a lot about, there's a lot of big macro challenges, but I think one of the reasons people feel so dismayed with politics as a whole is in terms of what they see on their front doorsteps, in terms of what they see in their local high street, what's happening in their communities. I think the local is incredibly important in shaping politics right now. But we've just been talking as well about the international stage, about how important that work is as well. How do you think Andy Burnham can not fall into the trap that Keir Starmer did? People felt he was away too much. He didn't connect with his own citizens. How does Andy Burnham sort of straddle those two things?
Well, as everyone's been saying, in the first sort of day or so for the new Prime Minister, he's going to really be appraised of how much of his time will be needed to be spent on security issues in this environment and international politics. And therefore, there's a couple of things. One is when he does do that necessary international piece, how does it relate to the voters back home? When he says there's a make or feel test, when you talk about international aid, for example, there's been some briefings that Labour will kind of move to increase international aid. So a lot of those voters, they, exactly as you say, Ayesha, they're thinking about on their doorstep, well, no one's fixing the potholes or turning the street lighting on. So what about the money that's going into our place? They've got to be really careful they don't get on the wrong side of that. And I think making sure that he's got that really direct communication to the public all the time. Andy's already shown that he's obviously a really savvy media operator. How does he make sure he keeps that kind of informality and common touch going when he's going to have to be going and doing some of this international work, which is necessary for our security? But he's really got to make sure that people know they are his priority, not anything that happens abroad. When he is abroad, it's them that he's thinking of.
And are there any, from the work that you've done, and you've been doing a lot of field work just over the last couple of days, so this is all very fresh information, are there calls for an early election from some of the people you spoke with?
So we did test that in our poll last weekend. And as I say, we poll working class voters because that is the problem that, as you know, that the centre left has got around the world, really, that it's not performing well amongst working class voters. And there actually was a call for, in some cases, an early election, but it was quite divided along party lines. So surprise, surprise, people who were inclined to vote Reform wanted an earlier election, perhaps the Conservatives too, but those who were kind of keeping more of an open mind or supported Labour, Greens or Lib Dems were not calling it so early. But they all want to see change quickly. So for all the voters that we polled, they were really saying they wanted to see change either within 12 months or within 6 months. It's really not very long. They feel the clock is already ticking. So these first few weeks, I think, are going to be really important to cementing an impression of Andy Burnham as someone who gets things done, which is what they like about him.
Yeah, well, look, Claire, really interesting research there. Thanks very much for coming on and sharing that with us. That's Claire Ainsley, who is the director of the Progressive Policy Institute.